Before we go any further, I wanted to take what we've learned from the previous lectures and do some more programming examples. These examples are going to be more of what you will expect to see on the quizzes and the homework. So the first example, what I want to do is I want to prompt the user for 3 grades, but I want to save the grades as integers and then calculate the average, but the average will be a float. Since the average is a float, I'm expecting to see fractions in the average. So let's get started. The name of my class is named Grade Calculator, which matches the name of my file. I have the main method, and I went ahead and imported the scanner class, and I instantiated my scanner object. Now what I need to do is declare variables for the grades and for the average. Now that I have declared variables for the grades and for the average, I'm going to go ahead and prompt the user for all 3 grades. I'm going to store that data inside of the grade variables, and then I'll go ahead and calculate the average. But first I want to set up the prompts for the grades. I've added statements to prompt the user for all 3 grades and to store the grades that the user enters. Now I'm going to go ahead and set up my calculation for average. I set up my calculation for average. I'm taking all 3 grades and dividing it by the number of grades. The number of grades is 3. 3 is a literal value, and this literal value is inside of an equation. This violates my coding standard, so I need to create a constant for this value and use a constant instead of using 3. So I'm going to go up top where my variables are. I'm going to create a constant for 3. Now that I've created a constant for 3, I'm going to use this constant in my calculation. Now that I have my average calculated, I'm going to go ahead and display the average along with all 3 grades. I now have the output of all my grades and the average. I'm going to go ahead and compile and run this program, and let's examine the results. Here's the output. I'm going to go ahead and enter 3 grades. So here is the list of grades, and here is my average. Now this seemed to work correctly, but let me try this again, entering different values. Here's the output. As you notice, my average is not retaining any of the fractional parts. The reason this is happening is because everything inside of my equation is an integer. So Java is doing this math with integers, so it's losing the decimal places. In order to retain the fractional part, I'm going to have to cast something to a float, either the sum or this constant. I want to go ahead and just cast this first part to a float. I'm going to do this using parentheses and then typing the data type float. Now that I've casted this to a float, my average should come out with the fractional part. You can see I'm now getting the fractional part for my average. But since this is an average, I don't really need this much precision on my decimals. So I want to do something to prevent all these decimals from being displayed. We talked about the printf method, how we can limit the number of decimal places. I want to limit this to 1 decimal place. In order to limit this to 1 decimal place, I'm going to come over here to my printf. I'm going to do 0.1, and that will tell Java to only show 1 decimal place. I'm going to rerun this program. And you can see I'm now limiting my output to 1 decimal place. So this is an example of finding the average where the numbers that were inputted are integers, but the actual average is a floating point value. In order to do this, we had to cast, and I also demonstrated limiting the decimal places.